doing?
I'm good. I was just getting a view of Dr. Clark's classroom that
So yes,
Your hair's gotten so long, Dr. Clark.
it has. It's
I like it. Hi, Dr. Lamb.
Hey, Dr. Lamb.
Hi, my hair hadn't got long.
But the beard's nice.
the beard, there
Yeah,
you
I
go.
like that. It's a nice
Yeah.
touch.
I'm
Yeah.
loving the man beard trend where it's getting all like you've been living in the woods for a year. I'm fascinated by this. And my husband seems to be so proud of it. And I'm like, why?
No, my wife hates the Santa Claus, the outdoor, and it just, it gets to be just such an ordeal.
I feel her pain.
My husband will usually have one. He did not this year because it was weird with the mask. So, but I like him with the beard.
Yeah, it's
I like a beard, but this is like
Crazy.
yeah.
Manly beard, huh?
Yeah.
You have Santa Claus beard, Dr. Lamb. Thank you so much. Lena's class was so exciting.
That was that I've got my book right here that I used.
That's precious.
I did Santa Claus virtually this year. I only did one.
Oh,
I only did one in-person Santa Claus this year.
That is so cool.
yeah.
This was a quarantine Santa Claus this year, and yes, that's really my beard.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is a beautiful picture. Oh,
Oh, how fun. That's
now
awesome.
the kid in relation to you.
No, that's Luann's grandson.
Oh,
That's in the Blanton Library. That if you look out the front door from Craig Hall, you see the back of Blanton. It's over to the left of DCC, and they've got a library on the back, and it's screened like a screen porch. They blasted in,
perfect. Yeah.
and it's a little reception area. And during quarantine, you could book it, and they kept it clean, and there was nobody in it. And that's me in the corner of the library, and so they kept him in quarantine for a few days before they brought him, and they quarantined, and so we had it set up where I could do Santa Claus there. I did some
Awesome.
private gigs there with them, and then but all the rest for schools was online where I read or did other things this year, and so the biggest thing is we didn't do a lot of fun. We couldn't do fundraisers. We couldn't take pictures and make money, for schools. But how relevant was that? We've been doing that to get Chromebooks and for fundraisers. And so just like with Jason up at Kaiser Elementary, we had the day that the year before, we had raised enough in one day for 13 Chromebooks.
It's amazing.
That's awesome.
And so that was the part we missed this year. I still could read to kids and came on, but without doing the pictures.
It was all gratis this year.
Yeah. And so for them, I know that, that's a big part, trying to bridge the digital divide for rural schools. And so we partnered with Thomasville this year, city schools, and we're doing some work down in Whiteville city schools. But we're mostly just doing PD this year. We can't do, trying to help them again with the digital divide and raise money, not just Santa Claus pictures. But yeah, it's been a tough year on fundraising.
Yeah.
Hopefully the CARES Act will make up for some of that, but
yeah. But
my guess is the strings attached to your fundraising look a little different.
Yeah, we talked about maybe doing those where you could donate, but a lot of school districts didn't allow that.
Right.
And so what was it I read this week? Oh yeah, it was a political cartoon, Career Day, where the teachers, they were recruiting them, and it said, please become a teacher. You have to buy your own supplies. You have to show up to work, and raise money, show up to work in a pandemic and do all these things for $35,000 a year. You know, the line starts over here. Well, see, it's another case of, you know, the pandemic has been economically disproportionate on the poor and disadvantaged people. Same thing, it's been on poor and disadvantaged schools as well. And so I hope at some point we can get back to where some sense of normalcy, where they can start trying to bridge the digital divide. I mean, we've been working on this for 3 or 4 years, not knowing a pandemic was coming, but knowing that they were already at a deficit in face-to-face classes. But you know, you amplify or multiply that now that we're digital. And so I was asked the question by the associate superintendent in Thomasville, would you develop a master schedule going forward for virtual as well as face-to-face or seated? And I said, absolutely.
Wow.
I would. You know, the solution is not just wait around and hope till it gets better.
Yeah.
You know, as numbers go up and down, and as you have other issues, you better be prepared.
You're right about that, Dr. Lamb, and we're coming back full bore no matter what. So,
yeah, we are too.
yep, our kids start back full time. We've been hybrid since August. They come back full time Monday. So we'll have everybody back in the building for the first time since last March. It's going to be
It'll be
And-
Wednesday since the holiday.
And after the Super Bowl weekend, last weekend, or weekend before last now, and Valentine's Day this weekend, by the end of the month, the numbers will be as high as they ever were or are.
It'll be interesting.
You know, and I wish, one of the things that I don't like is we're shaping the narrative. I wish that we would somehow we could ban the notion, or the phrase continue that I hear all the time is open schools back up safely. There is no open schools back up safely. What we need to talk about is risk and probability. We speak in absolutes, that there is a way, if we're just smart enough, we can figure out how to open schools safely. Well, that means to people that you know, it's just a matter of you want to or don't want to. No, it's not a matter of that. There is no opening schools up safely. And one of the things that initially this started out as the old and infirm, but because of the number of cases and the mutations, this, as all pandemics or all, you know, things happen, is if you let it get out of control, it won't just attack weaker people, it will attack healthy people as well. And that's where we are now.
Yep, I agree.
Did not control it. And so there might have been a time when that could have been a part of the discussion, but it's certainly not now. Not with all the mutations. What we have, how many? We have 4 identified cases here in Mecklenburg County of the South African strain that is very deadly, and the vaccine does not work on.
All right, Dr. Lamb, I think we are right a few minutes after 4. So I think everybody who is going to join us has joined us. And so let's go ahead and get started. Carrie, if you, first of all, welcome. Thank you guys for joining us. I feel like we know each other, so I was just skipping right past introductions. For those of you who are observing, typically in a committee, this would be the time for introductions, but we were just catching up. So thank you, Dr. Sumner and Dr. Lamb, for joining us today. We appreciate your time. Carrie, we're very excited to help see this journey to its conclusion. So we are looking forward to hearing from you. I believe you can take control of your screen at this point.
All right, let me go for that.
Go ahead and share. And Dr. Sumner and Dr. Lamb, if you want to, and if Carrie's okay with it, I think we'll run this just like we did the proposal. If you have questions, jump in. If not, Carrie, you just keep going and we'll pause as needed for questions. And then of course, at the end, we'll discuss again. And maybe Dr. Lamb will help us with the whole, what happens at the very end as far as breakouts and all those things go, because this is my first one I've done this way. So, I'm sure Dr. Lamb's handled that.
Oh yeah, I've made Carrie the host right now.
Okay.
I will assume the host at the end and do the breakouts. But for her ease in presentation, she is currently the host. But yes, I can do that at the end.
All right. Thank you so
Great.
much, Dr. Lamb.
Thank you.
All right, Carrie.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Well, hello, my name is Carrie McKeown, and I would like to formally welcome you to my dissertation defense of what teachers say versus what they do, examining the relationship of teacher dispositions and teacher behaviors as it impacts on learning environments. So I'll do some introductions. I am pleased to introduce and welcome my dissertation committee, Dr. Kelly Clark, my committee chair. Dr. Clark, you have been a sounding board and an advocate for my success for me throughout the years. And I am so happy to be able to finish this process with you. I couldn't have imagined it any other way. Dr. Dale Lamb, we go back several years with you as my professor going through the administrative certification courses. And I have just appreciated your input and influence over the years, and I'm honored to have you on my committee. And Dr. Karen Sumner, our conversations and collaboration since first meeting have been so enlightening and valuable to me throughout this process. So I just welcome you all here and thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. So today I want to briefly go through the review of my study. We will spend the most time on the results and analysis of the data, and then I'm going to end with my findings and recommendations. So the purpose of this study was to explore deep-seated beliefs that teachers have and to distinguish if there was a disconnect in the relationship between professional teacher dispositions that might have a profound impact on the success or lack of success of students in school. So the study determined that if dispositions practicing teachers demonstrated correlated with the dispositions they stated they practiced, and if these dispositions supported student success. This study also intends to help educators become aware of the role that teacher dispositions play in the classroom. So not only must teachers possess that content and pedagogical knowledge and skills, they must deliver instruction in a manner which results in a positive learning environment. My theoretical framework was around the social cognitive theory. So Albert Bandura had two principles, and he addressed how a person should be made aware of their teaching behaviors, how they were encouraged to recall behaviors, how they were modeled and then continuously applied them. So Bandura's theory was based on the implication that a person's belief was an outcome of a given behavior that could determine whether that person would demonstrate that behavior and then apply it in the field of education. For example, with further study, now that the teachers from my study have been made aware of these dispositions, would they change? So social cognitive theory explains how developmental changes and environmental influences and then other personal factors that teachers experience over the course of their careers can cultivate their dispositions. The importance of this study is that students in the US are continuing to underperform academically, and teacher expectations could affect student intellectual performance. Evidence from research suggested that teachers' input have impacts on student outcomes and that there is a significant correlation between teacher quality and quantity and student achievement. So it's also believed that teacher dispositions are as crucial for student achievement as teachers' pedagogical skills and knowledge. So this brought me to my problem statement where currently practicing teachers are not demonstrating professional dispositions in correlation with their knowledge and skills, which impacts a successful learning environment. The educator's disposition assessment, it's also known as the EDA, was a very important tool that I used throughout this study. The EDA instrument includes 9 teacher dispositions with 27 associated behaviors for disposition clarity. These 9 dispositions they're about attitudes and beliefs and commitments, ethics and values towards their students and families and colleagues in the community. So they can be described as an innate quality or ways of behaving. So teachers who possess these dispositions favorably to the profession, they are, when you look at these 9, setting a tone of the classroom by developing supportive and encouraging relationships with their students. They are establishing and implementing behavioral guidelines in ways that are promoting positive learning outcomes. They are encouraging cooperation among students and acting as role models for respectful and appropriate communication. There are several definitions of dispositions. This study used dispositions as professional attitudes and values and beliefs that are demonstrated through verbal and nonverbal behaviors as educators interact with students and the families and the colleagues and communities. So thinking about dispositions, they are a person's tendency to act in a given manner and are predictive of patterns of action. So they are an individual's inclination to act in a particular way under particular circumstances based on personal beliefs. And they're predictive of future actions. These are the 3 research questions my study sought to answer. 1, what professional dispositions impact student success in the learning environment as measured by the North Carolina End of Grade Assessments? It's also known as the NCFE, which is the North Carolina Final Exams. Number 2, what observed behaviors do effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success as measured by the NCFE data? And then 3, to what extent do observed behaviors correlate between teachers' self-professed dispositions and observations of an administrator? So my research approach was a mixed methods design. It was conducted in a secondary year-round public school in Central North Carolina. I had 8 secondary school teachers participate for my study. I used the Pearson's correlation statistic to analyze my quantitative data, which included the NCFE student scores, the educator's disposition assessment tool, and I used that for observations I did observations, so when you see researcher, that'll be me. An assistant principal, the administration, and then teachers also use that very same tool to conduct a self-assessment. The qualitative data that I collected was through written response questions, a focus group session, and then I also have phenomenological research where I use an open-ended protocol to collect that data. This is my data collection plan. This data collection plan just allows you to see the organization of data collected to answer each research question. So phenomenological research is the study of a person's lived experiences as they relate to a concept or phenomenon. In this case, the phenomenon is dispositions. So this qualitative approach is intuitive in nature, and it expands the scope of research to finding out the why and how of things that happen, in addition to the what and the where and when things happen. So I wanted to know if teachers' beliefs and values had changed throughout their teaching experiences and what situations from their experiences had influenced or affected their beliefs and values. So I used an open-ended protocol to ask two broad questions. And those two broad questions you can see on your left are: one, what have you experienced in education that has challenged your beliefs and values in the learning environment? And two, what situations from your experiences have influenced or affected your beliefs and values? So more on that to come. All right, so let's get started with the results and analysis of the data. So I am going to cover the NCFE scores. I will talk about the observation data that was the part of the EDA. That includes researcher, myself, the administrator, an assistant principal of the school that I conducted the research in, and then the teachers did a self-assessment on a lesson that they had recently done. I'll go through the written response data, focus group data, and then end with the phenomenological research. So observational data was used to examine correlations of teacher dispositions and student achievement to answer research question 1. The table that you see at the top of the slide displays the Educator Disposition Assessment Instrument, also known as the EDA. And this was utilized to measure the dispositions of teachers from 4 observative perspectives. So you see tier talk observations, which were grade levels getting together to discuss kid talk, to talk about students. The researcher observations, I've mentioned, those are mine. The administrator observations, the assistant principal, and then the teacher self-assessment. For each perspective, I completed the EDA instrument based on the criteria of each of the 9 dispositions using a Likert scale of 0 needs improvement, 1 developing, and 2 meets expectations. This data was utilized to derive a composite for each of the 4 observation types. So composite computation was done by calculating the mean of the 9 dispositions and then setting scores on a 0 to 100 scale. The tier talk meetings were not used in my final analysis due to the nature of the tier talk meetings. Number of items were not applicable, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I was unable to complete all 8 of the tier talk observations. So my observations had a mean score of 70.82. The administrator and the teacher self-assessment observations had mean scores of 83.5 and 90.46. The higher administrator scores could have been attributable to the administrator being more familiar with the teachers. So the highest mean scores came from the teacher self-assessment, implying that teachers see themselves as demonstrating specific dispositions. The student achievement data, the table that you see at the bottom, was based on the North Carolina final exams, so the NCFE. Up to 3 consecutive academic years were averaged for each teacher to obtain a more holistic measure of teacher effectiveness on student achievement. And then due to varying subjects and grades taught among the studied teachers, the final exam scores were normalized to allow for a standard scale to be applied to the analysis. Student Z-scores were calculated by dividing the difference between the actual student score and the minimum score from the sample by the difference between the sample's maximum and minimum scores. So teachers with student scores above the average of 0.70 were designated higher performing, and those scoring below the average of 70 were designated lower performing throughout this study. The Pearson's correlation scores provided additional insight for me. Although a correlation was not evident between my observed EDA scores and student achievement, a moderate to strong linear relationship existed between student achievement and both the EDA administrative composite and the EDA teacher self-assessment composite scores. This relationship may indicate that the evidence of teachers displaying strong dispositions may have a positive impact on student achievement. Because the p-values of these correlations were not statistically significant, A determination of the existence of that cannot be proven as not occurring by something other than just chance. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about those scatter plots. So on this scatter plot, each dot represents a teacher's NCFE student score and the relationship with the EDA composite score. So this scatter plot shows the lesser defined relationship or no correlation between the EDA researcher score, me, and student achievement. This could be explained by the lack of familiarity of the rater with the teachers. This scatter plot shows the more defined moderate to strong linear relationship of student achievement with the EDA administrator observations. This was supported by the Pearson correlation statistic 0.68. However, the relationship was not statistically significant, as you can see. Its low sample size may reflect why the p-value was greater than 0.05. So 5 teachers scored above the average of 0.70, which indicates higher student success. These teachers, number 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7, were analyzed for disposition trends as higher performing teachers. 3 teachers, numbers 1, 5, and 8, were analyzed for disposition trends as lower performing teachers. And as you can see, they fell below the average of the 0.70. So from this point on, I will refer to them as higher or lower performing teachers. And this scatter plot for student achievement by EDA teacher self-assessment observations showed a moderate to strong correlation supported by the Pearson correlation statistic. The EDA administrator and the EDA teacher self-assessment relationship with teacher achievement may indicate that the evidence of teachers displaying strong dispositions may have a positive impact on student achievement. So to be able to determine research question 1, I then focused on the counts using the meets expectation rating for the administrator and the teacher self-assessment for all 8 teachers. So as you will see, I divided this data into higher and lower performing teachers as my study progressed. So this slide displays dispositions by observation type. We have administrator, the self-assessment done by the teachers, and researcher, my observations, and it's all using the meets expectation criteria. The meets expectation rating indicates that a teacher would have had considerable evidence of understanding and commitment to the disposition being rated. So when you look at the first column titled administrator, you see effective oral communication skills, professionalism, and preparedness in teaching had the highest above the mean counts using the meets expectation rating. As you can see, these same 3 dispositions were also above the mean for the self-assessment in that middle column, along with social and emotional intelligence. And in the third column, researcher also identified the same 3 dispositions. This table displays teacher composite scores by observation type. But on the right-hand side, I have separated them into higher and lower performing groupings to make this analysis. When combining the 5 higher performing teachers, the EDA composite score was 88.85, and the 3 lower performing teachers was 74.6. A higher score from the higher performing teachers indicated more dispositions were observed with the higher performing teachers than observed with the lower performing teachers. And then looking at the self-assessment composite score of 93.25 for the higher performing teachers and 85.8 for the lower performing teachers, the same observation applied. The data established higher performing teachers from the self-assessment indicated that they met expectations at a higher rate than the administrator observed the dispositions. Now we will look at the analysis of lower and higher performing teachers through the lens of administrator disposition counts for the meets expectation. My research question 2 asked, what observed behaviors do effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success as measured by the NCFE? So I am using the administrator observation as the Pearson statistic exhibited that moderate to strong correlation with student achievement. Comparing the disposition from lower to higher, the counts for the higher performing group was higher for every disposition than the counts for the lower performing teachers. Considering the moderate to strong relationship between the admin observations and the student achievement for higher performing teachers, there were 5 dispositions that were identified at or above the mean. You can see here it was professionalism, preparedness in teaching and learning, effective oral communication skills, collaborates with stakeholders, and social and emotional intelligence. So these identified dispositions may give insight into the observed behaviors effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success. I would like to point out that self-regulated learner had the lowest counts for lower and higher performing teachers. This chart displays data from the 8 written response questions that I developed in relation to research question 1 and research question 3. I've put them on the slide for you to remind you what they are. I utilized the Deduce program to code for themes and patterns in the teacher's responses. The dispositions with the most applications was appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity, positive and enthusiastic attitude, and social and emotional intelligence. So the next slide I'm going to show you is going to break this data down by higher and lower performing teachers. So both groups identified the same 3 dispositions above their respective mean. These dispositions were appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity, positive enthusiastic attitude, and social and emotional intelligence. Both the lower and the higher did write about appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity as the top disposition. And this disposition, I just want to share, is encouraged throughout the district in which I am an employee. We see this in our vision and our mission and our values and beliefs. So when we say things like, all students will be prepared to reach their full potential, or every student deserves to be challenged in a meaningful learning way each day, that aligns to that disposition. After collecting this data, I used a focus group to further investigate the attitudes and the beliefs and experiences of the teachers. The focus group data was transcribed and coded for themes, also using the Deduce program. So higher performing teachers, the dispositions with the highest counts that emerged above the mean were professionalism, collaborates with stakeholders, effective oral communication skills, and preparedness in teaching and learning. From the lower performing teachers, the disposition counts were lower than the higher performing teachers. However, written communication skills, effective oral communication skills, and preparedness in teaching and learning emerged with the highest counts above the mean. At this point, I could not measure the extent teachers' self-professed dispositions correlate with observations of an administrator, but I could establish the pattern of the same dispositions discussed by the higher performing teachers were observed by the administrator. Another observation is the higher performing teachers discussed more dispositions than the lower performing teachers for each and every disposition. I would like to point out again that in the focus group data, the self-regulated learner was discussed the least for lower and higher performing teachers. Teacher self-assessment correlation with administrator observations. So the table on the left displays in descending order the self-assessment disposition counts for higher performing teachers. And the table on the right displays in descending order the meets expectations scale comparing self-assessment to administrator observation dispositions, again for the higher performing teachers. The top three dispositions, as you can see, were professionalism, preparedness in teaching and learning, and effective oral communication skills. And those emerged as teachers' self-assessment dispositions, which correlated with the top three observations of the administrator for the higher performing teachers. This data allowed me to see more about what what dispositions teachers say they demonstrate compared to what teachers' dispositions they were observed demonstrating in the classroom by the administrator. And I'll point out again that self-regulated learner was the lowest disposition rated. So to determine if a relationship existed between the self-professed teacher behaviors, I took the written response questions, the focus group, and the self-assessment, and those three were combined into one variable. And then tested them to determine whether there was a correlation between this and the EDA administrator counts. So the scatter plot on the left, which you've seen already, displayed that moderate to strong relationship of student achievement with the EDA administrator observations, supported by that Pearson correlation statistic. And the scatter plot on your right represents the correlation between the composite counts of the written, the focus group, and the self-assessments for each teacher and the administrator counts. So the zeros, those blue circles in the higher performing teacher field, are the lower performing teachers. And the ones, the little red triangles, indicate the higher performing teachers. There was no correlation between lower self-professed administrator teacher behavior counts. There was a moderate positive correlation between higher performing self-professed teacher behaviors and the administrator observations. So since a relationship exists between the admin observations and student achievement, and a relationship exists between the higher performing teacher composite self-professed dispositions and the administrator observations, this consistency of correlations would indicate that a relationship exists between higher performing self-professed teacher behavior composite and student achievement. This chart displays the raw data, combining the counts of the written, the focus, and the self-assessment into a self-professed category. So this data is displayed by lower and higher performing teachers. The data now suggests an answer to research question 1 and research question 3. The dispositions from the higher performing teachers above the mean of self-professed, so the written and the focus and the self-assessment composites, as you can see, were professionalism, appreciation, a positive enthusiastic attitude, social and emotional, and preparedness in teaching and learning. And then this brings me to my phenomenological research. So all 8 teachers provided a written response to an open-ended protocol. I uploaded those responses to Deduce to look for patterns the 8 teachers shared a common theme around, and to look for that big picture and notice the trends emerging from the data. So on your left, the chart on your left, the question asked was, what have you experienced in education that has challenged your beliefs and values in the learning environment? And as you can see, overall, the disposition that was identified from the protocol with the highest above the mean counts was preparedness in teaching and learning disposition. The second one I asked, what situations from your experiences have influenced or affected your beliefs and values? The commonality of the situations from those experiences and values were embedded in, identified the appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity, and professionalism, preparedness in teaching and learning, and positive and enthusiastic attitude dispositions. So this concludes the data analysis and interpretation of the evidence collected. All right, if there are no questions, I will keep going. Okay. So now I'm going to share with you my findings based on the data and analysis of the evidence that I collected for research question 1, research question 2, and 3, the connections to the phenomenological research, limitations, implications, and recommendations for future research, and then I will end with final remarks. So research question 1 says, what professional dispositions impact student success in the learning environment as measured by the NCFE data? So if you remember, that Pearson statistic exhibited that moderate to strong correlation between the admin observations and the teacher's self-assessed scores and student achievement. We also learned through looking at the scatter plots that the administrative observations and that self-assessment appeared to have that more defined relationship with student achievement. Remembering also that relationship did exist between the admin observations and student achievement, and a relationship existed with the higher performing teachers' self-professed dispositions and those admin observations. So the dispositions from that higher performing teacher's self-professed data, you can see they were professionalism, appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity, positive and enthusiastic attitude, and social and emotional intelligence, and preparedness in teaching and learning. I do believe that this limited sample size that I had for the study does warrant further research. Research question 2, what observed behaviors do effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success? Again, remembering that the administrator composite score had indicated that higher performing teachers demonstrated more observations than the lower. The Pearson correlation between admin observations and student achievement was moderate to strong. And then considering that moderate to strong relationship, the admin observations and student achievement for the higher performing teachers identified 5 dispositions: professionalism, preparedness, effective oral, collaborates, and social and emotional. Research question 3, to what extent do teachers' self-professed dispositions correlate with observations of an administrator? So when comparing those two groups of teachers, lower and higher, the data indicated that the higher performing teachers talked more about dispositions than the lower. And then consistency existed between the relationship of the admin observed dispositions with student achievement and the self-professed teacher dispositions with the admin dispositions. And then the dispositions for the higher performing teachers of self-professed were professionalism, appreciation, positive and enthusiastic attitude, social and emotional, and preparedness in teaching and learning. Again, I think this there is potential need for further research and larger sample sizes. My connections to phenomenological research. So this is really around what each teacher had in common with the phenomenon of professional dispositions. While each teacher shared a different experience and a response to the 2 questions, they all had some similarities to their responses. So the first one, what have you experienced in education that has challenged your beliefs and values in the learning environment, had identified preparedness in teaching and learning. So what I would like to do for you is read you an excerpt from one of the teacher responses that provides an example of what it looks like to be prepared, like when they were talking about preparedness in teaching and learning. As a teacher, I've experienced the loss of control of curriculum. Frankly, it has been devastating. I used to carefully craft units based on the central text bank from teaching tolerance. I used fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to expose students to ideas from a variety of historical figures and talented authors. I have zero passion for topics like bottom trawling and DDT. It's hard to teach topics that I find incredibly dull. I have learned that learner agency is just as important for teachers as it is for students. So when we're thinking about this disposition and how we could see that embedded in that teacher's response, when we're thinking about how effective teaching begins with effective planning, such planning involves thinking about how students will engage in the learning process. Prepared teachers consider the details in their planning, and then they make necessary adjustments along the way. They require flexibility and the responsiveness throughout that teaching and learning experience. So effective teachers are those who prepare for instruction based on desired outcomes and goals. So the second question, what situations from your experiences have influenced or affected your beliefs and values? Identified 4 above the mean dispositions. So we had appreciation of and value for academic, cultural and academic diversity, preparedness in teaching and learning, positive and enthusiastic attitude, and professionalism. And because appreciation of and value for cultural and academic diversity was the top disposition here, I would like to read you a brief response from a teacher on this second question to provide that example of how it aligns to this disposition. As someone from out of state, I had never overheard such blatant racism and disdain for people of color in my life. I grew up in an area where issues of race were not discussed openly in the community. In my family home, my parents, my father in particular, practiced and promoted anti-racist beliefs. Moving to the South and teaching at a Southern middle school was an eye-opener. A white teacher was repulsed and horrified that a particular student was running for student council president. I asked why she objected. The teacher growled, "She's Black." As a young teacher at the Southern Middle School, I was never allowed to teach the AIG students. They were almost all white. So I ended up with classes of mostly Latino and Black students. I loved my students. I knew they needed an advocate in the building because many of the other teachers were oozing racism out of their pores. And after 7 years there, I felt defeated. So when we think about what has impacted these teachers and their responses to this question, and when we're thinking about possessing an appreciation and value for cultural and academic diversity, that requires a mindset of inclusivity. Culturally aware educators consider the differences of others, and they do not allow such diversity to dictate their actions adversely. Inclusion permeates in all areas of teaching and learning, such as instructional activities and the classroom community and interactions with others. Additionally, the environment is one in which students feel safe because the teachers created a positive and respectful environment. So in essence, the teachers are to be culturally aware and responsive, which entails recognizes the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. So with this data, there may be a way to explore solutions in the future to support why we act in certain ways in response to certain phenomena. Several limitations that I noted were the small sample size, permission to use EVAS data. I had originally wanted to use EVAS data, but because that is confidential to teachers, I only gained permission to use the NCFE data. Number of classroom observations conducted, limitations, I had only done one observation in the classroom, but that also excluded some of the tier talk. And then the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've learned that dispositions may guide the goals that teachers make and their emotions, the decisions that they make day to day, their actions and their behaviors, and the reactions in the learning environment. So the need for teacher awareness of their behaviors and beliefs as it impacts student achievement may support how teachers acquire and maintain their behavior, while also reflecting on their social environment in relation to the performance of that behavior. And then continuous professional development on the topic of professional dispositions and social cognitive theory with more modeling and more opportunities to observe could support the beliefs that teachers develop and influence that what and that how they teach in their learning environment. So thinking about really how they're going to get a better grasp on those expectations once they've been exposed to the assessments, and then that opportunity to reflect on their individual dispositions and perhaps a chance to alter the behaviors based on that reflection. My recommendations include teachers become aware of the importance of their behaviors and understanding of professional dispositions and the impact that their behaviors and beliefs on student achievement. Again, getting that better grasp and being exposed to those assessments and reflecting, having those opportunities to alter and change. A recommendation is to also have the district perhaps use Martin Haberman's pre-screener tool. I love this. It's a pre-screener tool for prospective teachers prior to the interview for employment. So the challenge is not just selecting a certified teacher for the job, but a qualified teacher whose deep-seated beliefs about education align to their behaviors in the classroom. And then also a recommendation for colleges and universities to provide awareness of positive dispositions for pre-service and beginning teachers. Because not only do we need to focus on those pre-service ones, we need to see what they're doing once they get into the classrooms as well. My recommendations for future research are to observe over a longer period of time and perhaps at the elementary level. I would like to incorporate a larger sample size, and then a study on Albert Bandura's principles of how those people should be made more aware of their dispositions so that they can be encouraged to reflect on them and model them and apply them into the educational field. And then a study to determine if programs that prepare beginning teachers demonstrate dispositions that correlate with dispositions they state they practice. And my final remarks. So the best way for me to visualize my study, what teachers say versus what they do, examining the relationship of teacher dispositions and teacher behaviors as it impacts on the learning environment, was to provide a visual for you of those dispositions that impacted student success. So I highlight these as the dispositions from the administrator observations that had that moderate to strong relationship with student achievement. And that was for the higher performing teachers. And the moderate positive correlation between the higher performing self-professed teacher behaviors. So thinking about that written and the focus and the self-assessment and the admin observations. For me, as important as it is to analyze the dispositions that appear to have an impact, it is the ones that teachers did not discuss, that were not observed, that continue to need to be examined. I feel my study reveals higher performing teachers embrace at a higher degree the dispositions studied by this research than do the lower performing teachers. But new questions emerged for me. What would be the impact if all teachers embraced the demonstrated EDA dispositions? So even while each teacher shared different experiences and responses to my phenomenological research questions, and we saw that there were some similarities in those responses, the connections are illustrated here for you. You can see them in the green. My study was to determine if dispositions practicing teachers demonstrated correlated with the dispositions they stated they practiced. And this chart shows a mixed answer to this question. As to whether these dispositions support student success had a clearer answer, they do. So it is necessary for teachers to learn that those who care about their students are willing to exert the effort needed to ensure the classroom is a productive learning environment that reflects positive dispositions. And as the key role model in the classroom, teachers have a significant chance to affect the positive development of all children they teach. So it was a great opportunity to read a number of professional experts and professors and research to learn about my topic in the educational field. And with that, I truly just want to say thank you, Dr. Clark, committee chair, Dr. Lamb, committee member, Dr. Sumner, committee member, and if Dr. Bull was here, I would also thank him as well. So thank you so much. All right, that concludes it.
Thank you, Carrie. That was amazing. I loved hearing from you, your passion behind the research. It just gives so much more to the words that we've already read. So let me open up the floor to Dr. Sumner and Dr. Lamb. Are there questions you guys have at this point for Carrie?
I think I just have a couple of observations, and Carrie, as always, you stimulate my thinking. And so this is not really questions about the research so much as just, I couldn't stop thinking about some of these things. Number one, I was kind of surprised that the teacher self-assessment was so high overall. Sometimes I find that teachers have a tendency to be harder on themselves. So I wondered about the logistics of that. Like, was it pre, like, I can't remember the time frame. When did they complete that?
So I had gone in to do my observations first. I had attempted to try to do the tier talk observations, and I had also had the admin go in and do her observations prior to them even seeing the tool. So I didn't want them to have any changes based on the lessons if they'd already seen those dispositions. So looking at that was the first time. They did have to use a lesson that they had to remember, one that they had done recently because of the COVID-19. So that impacted that as well. One of my assumptions, I'd written about this earlier in the chapters, one of my assumptions was that I felt like teachers would rate themselves higher. I tend to see that, and it's interesting that you asked that question because I tend to see teachers, or even when they're talking about it, when we're in meetings and PLTs together, they seem to talk a lot about having those dispositions or having those teacher quality characteristics. So it was interesting to see that my assumption was true, that they did rate themselves higher.
Interesting. And I'd be curious about, is that a school environment, like a cultural thing that would be different among different groups of teachers at different schools? And I don't know. And I definitely am curious about what it would look like in February of 2021, when so many of our teachers who are really struggling with, all of those things, if they're having to do so virtually or with with little cages throughout their room, like Dr. Clark.
Yeah, after doing this, you think of 100 different ways that you could have run this or made those observations, and I definitely, those ran through my mind. Gosh, there was so many, you had to narrow it down.
Yeah, but it just made me so curious about so many different things. And one of the other things, I don't know if you all remember, but gosh, it's probably been a decade when we really started looking at teacher professional development plans and really thinking about, okay, if we put a teacher on, I'm not even going to remember the correct language at this point, but I spent a lot of time training people to be outside observers. And I think about the correlation that you found, that sort of you in this role a little bit was kind of an outside observer. And in the case of what I'm talking about, these people were making decisions about whether this teacher would keep his or her job or not. So I thought about that was sort of interesting. And granted, their data in terms of student achievement was probably not great to get them in the position where those observations were happening. But I just kept thinking about it made me see that a little bit differently. Can you really get a true picture if you're doing an isolated observation and you're really kind of trying to judge a lot of those dispositions? So I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing with the self-regulated learner being consistently lowest, do you think they really understood what that meant?
Well, no, and then on purpose, I didn't go into depth. They're the 27 indicators that are aligned to each of those dispositions. And I didn't go into depth with them because I didn't want it to skew how their performance on the observations or even in the written. I didn't want them to really know much else about it other than the name of that one. when you think about self-regulated learner, you're thinking about how they're managing stress also. So also how they're controlling impulses, how they're motivating themselves, and then how they are meeting and making academic and personal goals. So it is disconcerting that, I almost feel like that's kind of where you might need to start.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to dig deeper and see, do they really understand what that meant? Did they really
Right.
have a grasp of that one? And then, okay, so here's my last observation, and I'll give up the floor here. I keep thinking about a next step in this research. I would be so curious for somebody who could use the EVOS data and compare that to teacher dispositions and really be able to look at some of the demographic data associated with students and say, are we seeing correlations with various subgroups and subgroup performance? And I just can't stop thinking, when I was reading your dissertation, I kept thinking, man, I would love to.
Oh, look at Dr. Clark's face. We try
about killed
so
us.
hard.
That was exactly where we went years
I
ago.
questioned from the beginning whether they would let you get a hold of that data, but I would love for somebody, to me, this would be really fascinating to see,
Yes. I agree. I agree with you. Dr. Clark and I talked a lot about that. I think we were both heartbroken when I did not get approved through my county to do the study unless I made that change. And they were even a little bit skeptical about approving the study because you're looking at, very personal beliefs and values, and it's hard to measure.
And
It's
you're
hard
in
to
a
measure
county that is notorious for being pretty tough in terms of
Ooh, yes,
gatekeeping
yes.
and
That's
yeah.
right.
Yes.
It
Whereas
wasn't personal, I can tell you that.
I had another student in a much larger county who had access to all observational data in the system and did a meta-analysis on it. So yeah, I was like, of course. Yeah, no, not that county.
Thank you, Dr. Sumner.
Dr. Lamb, do you have anything for Carrie?
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Just a couple of notes to piggyback on what Dr. Sumner just said. Since teacher input is only attributed to, or is attributable, only 10% of the variance in a kid's test score can be attributed to the teacher. You'll never, no matter how large your sample size is, you're never going to achieve statistical significance.
Yeah.
Teachers only account for 10% of the variance. And so that's why. So even though, you had if you'd have had 80, you still wouldn't have had, statistical significance. So a larger sample size is not going to help unless you go to EVOS data. That's when we talk about next steps, it has to be EVOS data. I mean, even
and to even look at that EVOS data prior, maybe do some professional development, some continuous professional development, and then looking at that EVOS data again, maybe we could find some significance there.
Comparative accountability integrate into test is about who you got, not about what you did with them. EVOS is about what you did with them. That's not about who you got. Right. And so when we're talking about teacher input, teacher impact, we have to be careful not to buy into confirmation bias. Born on third and thought you hit a triple. Do teachers have a lot of self-efficacy because they do a good job or because they get kids who score well? It's easy to feel good about yourself and rate yourself high when you have high scoring kids. Again, born on third and thought you hit a triple.
Right.
That kind of thing. I used to teach my wife, who was an IB teacher at a very boutique, exclusive middle school. And I told her all the time, the most important person in their organization was a custodian. Because as long as he got the door open every morning, the scores were going to walk right in. It was about who they had. And when we went to growth accountability, they struggled initially. And so going forward, first thing, we got to use EVOS data. Comparative accountability data, end of score will not help us. Yeah. That's more about who we got than what we did with them. And understanding that we've got to be able to determine if the efficacy, the feeling that they have, their dispositional behaviors, is that based on what we have to be careful in research that we don't get the association or correlation backwards.
Right.
I feel good about myself, and so I'm a better teacher. No, maybe because my kids scored well, I feel better about myself. And sometimes that confidence is not warranted. That's kind of what your data showed. Yeah, that they rated themselves a lot higher than their administrators did. And they based how they rated themselves basically on how well their kids did. And they only have a 10% variance in that, how well their kids did. And so baseball has a statistic just like EVOS. It's called wins against replacement. and it perks out just like EVOS does your impact. And so that calculation controls for everything except for you. That's what EVOS does. And I like to think of EVOS as, again, and that same term, wins over replacement. This kid made growth. That's a win. And so going forward, two things catch me in this. Number one, we've got to use EVOS data going forward. And number two, larger sample size isn't going to help. And the second part of that is we would have to explore the relationship. And I use all these metaphors, or simile in this case. It's like chicken and egg. Which came first? Did the dispositional, the high dispositional scores come? Does that lead to better test scores, or do better test scores lead to higher dispositional feelings of self-efficacy in teachers? I mean, which came first? I suspect that would be an interesting thing to know. But you've kind of taken us up to that preface. I especially like your phenomenological work.
Thank you.
I think that's the strength of what you've done, because obviously without statistical significance, what you've done is great. But where this study can really inform where we go is the phenomenological work.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought it was excellent. So thank you
so much. I appreciate your comments, Dr. Lamb. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb and Dr. Sumner. I do think, Carrie, I think you got us down that road of Dr. Lamb, the second point he was making in your looking at future research with regards to tracking dispositions from pre-service.
Right.
Because that kind of addresses that chicken egg thing. So that beginning teachers early on, I know that if you're CAPE accredited, then dispositions are required. You have to do that as part of it, which is how we got to the EDA. But if you're not CAPE accredited, then you don't necessarily have to teach it. So I think that that's a great point, Dr. Lamb. I agree with you. And Dr. Sumner, yeah, there's so much other stuff here I wanted to know.
Yeah, and I'm a big Haberman fan. I went through the training.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When I was a principal, I went through that training. Charlotte Mecklenburg offered it to us and had Dr. Haberman come in from, where's he from? Minnesota?
Yes. Milwaukee. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm a big believer in that. Again, to Dr. Clark's point, if you track them for pre-service, when you actually start hiring people, if you track them, you can kind of figure out the chicken and egg deal. For lack of a more enlightened metaphor.
And if you're using the EDA and the college is using the EDA, you could even track them from the time they come into education.
Continue to use it.
Right, which to me would be like the trifecta, right?
And then you'd have somewhere to start. You could say this is where they were and see where they go changing.
And add to that phenomenological piece too of, are you seeing things outside of what you were taught? Because that happens quite a bit when we lose them.
Yeah.
Well, I even think about like they're not called lateral entry anymore. We're phasing that out, but I think about what this would mean to do like pre and post for lateral entry teachers who really needed maybe some support in these particular areas very quickly early on. I think that would be fascinating.
I think not only those folks, but also your initial people. I think it would speak to, there's a term that I can't think of, I'm old, their willingness to stay, you know, stick-to-itiveness. This is a kind of prediction on that as well.
Oh yeah.
How many of them, you know, will fight the good fight and have the dispositional behaviors that they won't get down and get depressed and
That burnout. And Haberman talks a lot about that.
and give up. And that's a lot of the Haberman stuff is you're trying to find people who won't have the sniffles by Halloween and be crying by Thanksgiving and quit and don't come back after Christmas. That's a big part of Haberman in urban systems, is to find people who have that stick-to-itiveness that won't quit on you by the middle of the year. Doesn't do any good how good they are the first month if they're gone by Christmas. And that's a lot of this as well. These dispositional behaviors lead us to digging in when times are tough and finding a way to teach kids. You know, the ones that have to actually be taught, and that the scores just don't walk in the front door.
Especially dealing with a pandemic where it's very challenging right now. The conversations that I'm hearing in a bunch of PLTs are quite concerning, but it's hard for the entire world. And it's doable. We're you know, we talk about how we're going back to school. We're in school. You know, kids never left school.
Exactly.
We're in it.
In your bodies, yeah.
So we got to do what we're doing with it.
All right. So Carrie, for your next dissertation, you can now have lots of ideas.
My children will kill me.
No. All right, Dr. Lamb, what's our next step here for our conversation? Do we go to a breakout room and Carrie hangs out? How does that work?
I'm going to see if, well, since we only, let me see. Let's see. All right.
You want me to join that one?
Yep.
Okay.
I have you and Miss Littlejohn. I have assigned you to room 1, and as soon as you join, you're in progress right now. You will.
Okay. So when I join that one, I will go away from you guys. Is that how this works? And then you'll let me know when to come back?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm thinking that makes more sense to do it that way than the way I've been doing it, where it's the opposite, where we go to a breakout.
Well, if you do it this way, we can continue to record.
Yeah.
If we go, then we lose the recording of this session where we actually take the vote.
Okay.
I don't have any concerns, so.
None. That was maybe the best dissertation defense presentation I've seen. It was one of the top 3 or 4 I've seen.
He is so passionate about this and has been from day one. We literally started talking about this the first night of the very first class that she ever had. So this has been her thing.
Who is Aaron Weiss? I noticed that she said that was her data person.
He is one of the testing people in Wake County who volunteered to help her do it. So I trust the data. You know, they don't. Yeah,
I was going to say he's obviously very good.
Yes,
he did a great job on the quant. The sad part is she did such a great job on the quantitative side, but because it wasn't EVOS data, it's never going to be significant.
Yeah, and it killed her, and I had several people.
I hate that so much.
I didn't think it would work out, but
we had to
did
try.
She
Yeah.
did a great job on the phenomenology
Yeah.
on the qualitative side,
Mhm.
but it's just a shame she didn't have the EVOS data to work with so she could have significance on the quantitative side. But obviously, Aaron Weiss knows what he's doing. They did a really good job with that.
Mhm.
And
It's
I'm sorry, what she's got,
kudos.
yeah, and what she's got gives us a little bit of a lens into what could be very interesting things to make sure to follow up with for beginning teachers as far as that preparedness, professionalism, oral
Mhm.
communication, those things to be on the lookout for, but also for everyone to get into, I agree, that self-regulated learning piece and all that, because that seems to be lacking at the very least in this microcosm in this school, something that they need to work on. So
Well,
Mhm.
and I think that, the vast majority of schools, I know that, you think from a higher ed perspective, yes, those dispositions may be, known, but very few K-12 administrators or teachers have that knowledge and I mean, even just the awareness of it, I think would be helpful to say, these are things that.
yeah, wholeheartedly agree. My only recommendation for her is to add that first of all, there's a sentence at the end of research question 1. I don't know if it's just because I did put it to Google Docs or not, but anyway, it had a little bit of a weird thing with some capitals. That's minor. But she named the dispositions in research question 3 for some reason, like the top 3 that were related between admin, and she didn't name those in 1. And so I want her to go back and name those in 1, just add a sentence basically, because that's truly the answer to question 1. Like,
Yeah.
and I just didn't, I thought she'd done it. I didn't see it today. Dr. Lamb, do you think she should add EVOS data as a recommendation for future research? So that was
Had it on her slides. Yeah, I had it written down on my list right here before we started. And I was glad to see that she had that on her slide, that she realizes that going forward, there's no need to replicate what she's done because it will never be significant. The only way to achieve, no matter how big her sample size is, it won't matter until she uses EVOS data, which actually isolates the teacher's variance in student performance. 90% of when you're just using integrate into course exams, 90% of the variance in those scores is outside of the teacher. You're never going to achieve significance with that. Sorry. It has to be EVOS
that
data.
really does need to be in there. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we'll have her put a sentence or 2 about that in 5, and then add that 1 sentence for research question 1 in 5. Otherwise, I'm perfectly good. But yeah, I thought she did.
It
Great
was
job.
a joy to read and a joy to listen to her presentation. And I love being able to say that.
Thank you. Yes, me too. I love hearing that, but she's done it all. She's been great. I've just been asking questions.
I appreciate so much you sticking with her, and I know that meant a lot, and really appreciate you doing that.
Oh, yeah, of course. I've been with them since the beginning. I wanted to see it through, so I'm glad I could.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see big things from her in the future.
I agree. Dr. Lamb, if you don't mind doing the paperwork on campus tomorrow for us, the unofficial.
Yeah.
Dr. Carrie's
Wendy wasn't in today, but I have a call into her cell, and I'll be on campus tomorrow, and I will follow through with the paperwork.
Thank you.
I called Sandy and told her to prep it so it would be ready for whatever she can do to help and get it ready so we can move this along.
Thank you.
Will it be like we've been doing where she'll mail and then we mail it? Okay, cool.
So there's just basically the same paper that we sign that in when we're all together, that Dr. Lamb can initial for us, that goes in the record to begin with, and that gets scanned in. But the official papers that will go in her dissertation, she's going to mail those to me, and then I'm going to mail them to you, Dr. Sumner, and if you will then mail them to Dr. Lamb, so that we'll get them to campus before she publishes.
Right, and I'll do the preliminary, the fake paperwork that has to go through, and I will put your name in and I'll initial it. But again, the official will have to be mailed to you. That's correct.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Dr. Lamb, I appreciate you facilitating this, since I'm not getting to campus anytime soon. It doesn't look like. We don't get out till 4:15 nowadays. I'm glad we could do this today.
Yeah.
Well, considering you're getting ready to have a room full of kiddos, take your time.
17, can't wait. It's going to be fun. Anyway, no, it really will be. I'm glad to have it back.
We'll see you on Zoom for a couple of months.
Anyway, all right. So Dr. Lamb, I guess we'll call him back now.
Look at that, right on time.
Hi.
Hi. Congratulations, Dr. McKeown. And I'm not saying your last name right, I'm sorry, but congratulations.
My husband promised, he's like, don't worry, after you go from Sharp to McKeown, he's like, people just mess it up. He's like, yes, you'll just do it, but it's McKeown. Oh my gosh, thank
Congratulations,
you.
Dr. McKeown.
Yay.
We're so excited for you. Virtual hugs. I wish I could.
Okay.
do it in
Oh my
person.
gosh.
Congratulations.
I cannot believe this. I have my heart, I think is like, I spilled it out somewhere before this whole thing started. Oh my
You did a
goodness.
fabulous presentation, and it was a joy
Thank
to read your
you.
dissertation and exciting implications for future work too. So thank you.
Right.
So
Yay.
the committee agrees that this was a fantastic presentation. Your passion just showed through every second. So for other people who are taking note or who may see this in the future, do what Carrie did.
Okay.
And in addition, your paper itself was an excellent way to put together, well put together.
Oh.
Dr. Lamb even gives kudos to your data guy. How good he did.
Hey, and he liked the phenomenological research. I cannot tell you that was all for you, Dr. Lamb. That piece, all for you.
Well done.
It was great.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm just honored to have you three on my team. This has been great.
We're all very proud of you and
Thank you.
are glad
Thank
to
you.
add you to our ranks. Two things, very minor things, but you do. I've not
ready.
done one that hadn't had to have something. Two things, both in chapter 5, both very minor.
Okay.
Research question 1. If you will add somewhere in research question 1 where it makes sense and probably near the beginning, you have the first sentence of chapter 3 where or research question 3 in that answer where you name the 3 dispositions
Okay.
that are common between the administrator and the self-assessment. If you will add those 3, that's
Okay.
research question 1, because that's the real answer to 1. This is
Okay.
what we're seeing, that it has the commonality.
Okay.
And then something's weird at the last sentence, right before research question 2. The very end of it is in all caps. I don't know if that's because I put it in Google Docs or if it's just something that was missed in the editing. So just double check that.
Tell me where that is. Do you have the page number?
Yeah, I'm
I
getting
don't have it open.
Hold on. I'm right in the middle of it somewhere. Wait, final remarks, limitations. Let me scroll back up. Sorry, I'm scrolling slow. I was down in limitations. So, it is page 138. It's just made could increase the impact is all of those words are capitalized. I don't know why. But yet again, that could be because I'm in Google Docs, and if your Word document is fine, leave it that way.
Okay, I'll double check it.
Okay. And then last but not least, in your recommendations for future research, note in there a sentence or 2 that EVOS data, if you're using that, if they're going to replicate your research in the future, to use that data for test scores. And that's the one that you really are going to need to dig into to get very far with.
And don't be in my county. If you're going to do that study.
Put that in there, but yeah.
Go somewhere else and then come back.
Find a different district. Fine. No, but that's it.
Okay, I can do that. So when I make those changes, do I also need to send it back to the professional editor again? No?
No, those are minor. The one thing you need to do though is double check page numbers. From that point on, research question 1 on, just double check and make sure your page numbers either don't change, or if they do, you change them in the table of contents. And then that's it.
Okay.
Because they're so minor, it doesn't go back to the editor.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Once you get that done, print it.
Okay. Yes, yes. And Dr. Sumner, I think I'm going to need, you can just text it to me, your home address, so I can send you the approval page. Well, Dr. Clark will send you the approval page.
Okay.
It's
I'll send you, I'll do it right after we get off of here. I'll go ahead and send it, text it to you.
All right.
Do you have any questions for us?
Gosh. Not so much as questions. I just think that in all of our conversations and in the proposal, you really got me thinking about things. And I think in just having conversations with you three and listening to your own background expertise on so much knowledge around, I mean, it may not be around dispositions, but you helped me think outside of the box. You got me thinking about other things that I could research, and I'm just appreciative for having your professionalism, and you had the dispositions. I could just tell you that I would say that you have those things that helped me. Maybe it wasn't EVAS, but you helped me be a good student. I'm hoping that's shared in my success of student achievement. But just thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. It's been a joy to work with you, and I appreciate it. And, I'm grateful that I got to work with you, and I was able to finish, to be here at the end from the beginning. It feels like we've come full circle. So I know Dr. Lamb's been here even longer, but.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Dr. Clark, I'm sure I'll see you soon, or at least be in touch. And then Dr. Sumner and Dr. Lamb, I hope to see you again in the near future.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll definitely be in touch. So
All
go
right.
celebrate.
Congratulations.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.